Hey there guys, Nordic Warrior here, welcome back to my video game review series. So it's been quite a while since I reviewed a horror game. This one has been a long time coming. Today we're going to be looking at the original Silent Hill game for the PS1, released in 1999, developed by Konami. So Silent Hill is of course generally regarded as one of the best survival horror games to be released in the 90s. It's a game that kicked off one of the most successful and highly regarded franchises in the genre, spawning several sequels, spin-offs, and even a couple of movies. So how does the game hold up today? Let's talk about it. So the game is a third-person survival horror game that takes place in the fictional town of Silent Hill. The game's story is a strange and enigmatic one. You play as Harry Mason. The game begins with Harry deciding to drive his adopted daughter Cheryl to the town of Silent Hill. When arriving in town, Harry crashes his car and is knocked unconscious. He wakes up sometime later and realises that Cheryl is gone and is nowhere in sight. Harry will have to search the town, following clues and trying to find her. It becomes clear immediately that something is wrong with the town. The town appears to be deserted, and is blanketed by a thick fog that obscures your vision, and gives the game a very unsettling and confusing atmosphere. It's also inhabited by several types of disgusting, nightmarish creatures that attack you on sight. So yeah, it's a pretty stressful situation for Mr. Mason. As you play through the game, the town gets more and more nightmarish, and the story gets more and more confusing and enigmatic. You will occasionally bump into other characters, such as Sybil, a police officer who seems to have no idea what's going on, and seems to simply be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Have you seen a little girl? Just turned 7 last month, short, black hair. My daughter.
Sorry. The only person I've seen in this town is you.
As well as several others, and you will get cutscenes that convey the story.
What are you talking about?
I knew you'd come. You want the girl, right?
With plenty of dialogue and exposition. The vast majority of the game consists of traversing the town of Silent Hill, fighting or avoiding enemies, solving puzzles, searching for clues and trying to find Cheryl. Throughout the game you will traverse both the outdoor areas of the town, as well as several interior locations. While traversing the town, Harry will alternate between the regular realm and a terrifying and deeply disturbing nightmarish realm known as the Other World. Travelling to specific locations and completing objectives appears to trigger this change. There are several areas of the game where you will actually have to explore twice, once in the normal realm and once in the Other World, and there will be puzzles, collectibles and enemies to interact with, as well as objectives to complete. This is legit one of the scariest and most atmospheric games I've ever played, and the locations as well as the enemies do their bit to add to the overall feeling of dread. The game has quite a bit of combat. You have a whole bunch of weapons to find, some of them melee weapons and some of them guns. With this being a survival horror game, it's of course wise to ration your ammunition as much as possible, and use melee weapons when you can. The combat, while competent, is definitely one of the things about the game that hasn't aged well. With this being a horror game from the 90s, as you can imagine, the controls are very stiff and static, and can be very frustrating at times. This makes combat a pain in the ass, particularly early in the game. You will get used to it eventually, and when you get some of the more powerful weapons it's not so bad. But early in the game, when relying on what you have, it's annoying. This was pretty standard for horror games of the time, and it's something that likely wouldn't be accepted in a modern game. An argument could be made that the stiff, clunky controls do their bit to add to the experience and make the game a bit more tense, which I get, but at the same time, I would still rather the controls were a bit more fluid. The game would still have the same style and atmosphere, but it would just be a bit less frustrating and easier to get used to. But I digress. As I mentioned before, the game has plenty of weapon variety. As far as melee weapons go, you start off with a knife, which is worse than useless, don't even bother with it, and a metal pipe, which is useful but very difficult to use as it's slow and inaccurate. Later in the game you find some considerably better melee weapons, such as a big red hammer which is badass and has a long range. This is very useful against most enemies in the game and does significantly more damage than the early weapons. Once I found it, I found myself using it a lot. It really was fun. You also get an axe which is faster but not as powerful or rangy. And even a chainsaw and a katana, although sadly the chainsaw and the katana are not available on a first playthrough, which sucks. But to be fair, it does add some replay value to the game. As far as guns go, you start off with a handgun which is the weakest gun in the game, but is effective enough in combat. There's also plenty of ammunition for it scattered all over the game. You have a badass shotgun which is significantly more powerful and much more effective at close range. I had a lot of fun using this. You can't carry as much ammo, but like I said, it makes up for it by being so much more effective, so you won't have to use as much. You also have a hunting rifle that is more powerful than both and is considerably more effective from long range. This is more effective against bosses also. Just like with the melee weapons, you have some special weapons which cannot be obtained on a first playthrough, and can be unlocked by triggering specific endings. Most of these weapons are fairly easy to find, but be sure to keep your eyes open because a couple of them can be easily missed if you're not paying attention. The game also has plenty of enemy variety. I mentioned before that the town is filled with disgusting, nightmarish creatures. Some of these are absolutely terrifying and there's a lot of disturbing imagery. The way the enemies move and react to your presence is extremely disturbing too. Each location of the town will be populated with specific types of enemies. For example, you have groaners, which are demonic dog-like creatures. Rompers, which are stronger variants of these. Air screamers, which are these incredibly annoying flying enemies that fly around and disorient you, and are a pain in the ass to try and hit. You also have a night flutter, which is a stronger variant of these. A creeper, which is a small annoying enemy that, while easy to beat, can be a problem in large numbers and can creep up on you. You have mumbles, who resemble twisted demonic children who occupy the abandoned school, along with the grey children. You have rompers, which are terrifying humanoid type creatures that jump on you and try to eat you. You have hanged scratchers that occupy the sewers beneath the town and creep up on you, even trying to grab you from the ceiling. In the abandoned hospital section of the game, you have creepy possessed doctors and nurses, and that part of the game is terrifying. So yeah, there's plenty of enemy variety throughout the game. As I mentioned before, there are several different locations, some of them outdoor and some of them indoor. The outdoor locations of the game take a couple of forms. You have the quieter sections where you have to traverse the town, making your way through the fog. You also have darker outdoor sections where you can barely see a thing and may have to use a flashlight. There's also a terrifying abandoned school, as well as an abandoned hospital, which is even more terrifying. These levels take quite a while to complete and are full of enemies to defeat or avoid, and puzzles to complete. Speaking of puzzles, some of them are easy, others are a complete pain in the ass and flat out made no sense, clearly designed to pad out the game a bit, but that's just me. Maybe you had an easier time with them. They weren't quite as bad as some of the puzzles in Silent Hill 3 for example, those ones were an absolute nightmare, but I digress. They were still a bit of a problem. The game also has several boss battles. These are quite challenging and will often require you to use a very specific strategy to beat. They are few and far between though. They do their bit to vary the game for sure. I mentioned before that some of the unlockable content can only be unlocked by triggering specific endings. What's interesting about this is that the game gives you no indication whatsoever how to trigger each ending. The ending you get will be purely based on your choices throughout the game and how you decide to play it. This of course adds some replay value to the game because you'll presumably want to see the different endings and unlock some of the features. So yeah, in terms of the overall gameplay, atmosphere and level design, this is a solid survival horror game. The game does have some flaws though. As I mentioned before, the controls are very stiff and static, and this can lead to some frustration, particularly during combat. But again, this was pretty standard for survival horror games of the time. The story of the game, while interesting, isn't always conveyed well. The cutscenes and cinematics of the game look very good for the time. But the same can't be said for the in-game character models, which are very blocky and weird looking, even for the time. Also, some of the game's voice acting, yeah, it's pretty bad at times.
Harry!
How did you get back here?
I followed the sewer. Were you the one who cut the fence?
Yeah. I'm glad you made it. I was worried about you.
You were worried? Where did you disappear to? Never mind.
This is another thing that was quite common for survival horror games at the time for some reason. Really monotone and uninspired voice acting, with the voice actors clearly phoning in their performances and showing no emotion. I didn't mind this much in Silent Hill 2 because in that game, the characters including the protagonist seem to be in a sort of trance-like state. But in this game, Harry is trying to find and rescue his daughter, and you wouldn't know it from his behaviour. It's not a massive issue, but it's something that can break the immersion. So all in all, this is a pretty solid survival horror game, but it's one with some flaws that hold it back from being great. I give the original Silent Hill a solid 7 out of 10, which I think is a fair score. Thanks for watching, guys. Stay tuned for more retrospective video game reviews. Once again, I have a lot of reviews coming to the channel in the near future. Thanks for watching and God bless.
Well, I'd better be going. I can't just sit around here doing nothing.
So long. Good luck out there.